I'm here today to talk to you about elements, compounds, and mixtures. You thought I was going to say total cereal, but it actually serves as a very good example of that. We reach in here and take out a couple of these wonderful flakes. The very fact that you can look at these and see different gradients of brown and more brown, but different shades of brown tells us right away we know it's a mixture. And a mixture of what, you might ask? Well, they tell you exactly what it's a mixture of right here on the label. It's got 100% of everything in there. Now, no, it can't be 100% of all those things. Those are 100% of the recommended daily allowance of those things. But one of the things that kind of might surprise you is that there's iron in this cereal. Well, you say, of course there's iron. That's important for your diet. It is important to have in your diet hemoglobin molecules, which transport oxygen in the blood. They rely on iron. But is that the same kind of iron, students want to know, as like cars are made of, hammers and nails are made of? Yes, it is. Well, if there is in fact iron in these flakes, you would think that maybe they'd be attracted by a powerful magnet. Now, I've got a neodymium magnet right here, and it's very powerful. I can show you. Oh, there's some iron in that blender. So if there is iron in these flakes, we should see a definite attraction between the flakes and the magnet. So here we go. I'm going to bring this up next to them. I'm not seeing much here. No, not even that little guy. Well, there is an attraction, but because the iron in there is rather low concentration, it's not that strong, and there's a lot of friction between the flakes and the table. So here's an idea. We'll put these flakes in their natural environment, that is, floating in a little bowl. And I'm going to fill this Petri dish actually up all the way to the top and then some, so that they float just like that. They don't tend to go toward the surface, to the sides. And now, if you watch this, you can definitely see an attraction to the magnet. Or, if I go like this, I can have it switch directions. Oh, there's quite an attraction. Let's look at this small flake we had there. It's a good question. Is it going to be more attracted by the magnet or less? It's got less mass, so less inertia, but it's also got less iron. Oh, look at those two. They got magnetized and attracted to each other, I guess. Let's see this here. The flake definitely seems to be attracted pretty quickly, too. So there is iron, and you might be able to judge different iron contents of these cereals by having little flake races across the bowl. Another thing you might try doing, though, is extracting that iron from the cereal. And that's rather easy to do. That's what I have this blender for. So I'm going to put about a cup of water in our blender. And about a cup of cereal, which according to the label is, how many servings is that? Well, about a serving. 3/4 of a cup is a serving. So we'll get an idea of how much iron you get when you have a bowl of total in the morning. Okay? So here we go. Now I'm going to blend it for a little while. It's going to be rather noisy. So here we go. That's something you could call a cereal dilution. That's a joke, sorry. Anyway, bad joke. We're going to pour this off into a cup here. This looks appetizing, doesn't it? Ooh, nice and rich. And I'm going to actually pour back a little bit here to try to rinse out that sludge in the bottom, because I know there's some iron down there. Okay? And now, when you do this, you want to make sure you use a plastic spoon, because otherwise you're going to get stuck to the spoon here. And I'm just going to hold this magnet in place for a while as I stir this around. If you make this is called a slurry, if you make the slurry too thick, it'll be hard for the iron to get through. So this is pretty liquidy here. And I think you can already see, if I move this magnet to the side, a little spot of iron that's formed there. That was in there. There's plenty more in there though, so we'll collect a little bit more. This really disgusts the students. They don't like to see cereal blended with water, and they certainly don't like to see elemental iron, the kind of iron that's in nails and car bodies, in their breakfast cereal. But it's important for them to realize that that's an important nutrient, mineral for them to have in their diets. Now, once it's in the body, of course, it digests and it gets converted into iron ions, but it is in there as elemental iron. So here I think we can get a good picture of, and I don't think I've gotten it all. I don't know how long I have to stir it to get it all to come out, but I've gotten a good portion of it there. And to show you that that is in fact the iron and magnetic, watch what happens when I pull it over there. Now let's pull it back here. Okay? So, there it is. Iron in your breakfast cereal. Good example of a heterogeneous mixture and a nice little mixture separation done quite simply. Thank you.
California microbiologist Dr. Kary Mullis was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1993 for his development of one of the most widely used current techniques in molecular biology today, the PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. This revolutionary technique allows scientists to take a sample containing a very minute amount of DNA and replicate that DNA sequence until there are many copies. One of the first applications of
the people that are AIDS researchers now are getting neurotic if you ask them any questions. There was a time when I first started asking questions, all I wanted was, where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of the, I was working on a test for HIV with PCR, and I needed to write a little report to the NIH and say, here's the progress we've made. And the first line of it was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I thought that was true. This is before I got involved. And I said, what's the reference for that quote? And I looked for it for about 2 or 3 years, and I never could find it. And by the end of 2 years, I'd ask everybody at every meeting that I'd gone to that talked about AIDS, I'd ask, you know, I'd look through every computer database. There is no reference. There is nobody who should get credit for that statement. Now, that's a pretty weird situation in science, where getting credit for a discovery is the most important thing in your life as a scientist. It's silly to hear people saying, you don't believe that HIV causes AIDS? You don't believe that? I mean, it's just a word, but it's a very, very important distinction. I think that you know, that's why, it's become a very emotional kind of thing, because people actually, they get personally committed to what really is a body of evidence that can be analyzed, you know, by lots of people. And at this point, there's so much of it out there, nobody can really analyze it, all of it, but nobody can write a review of it that says HIV causes AIDS because of this. You know, if a postdoc were to write a review of their literature that showed without much doubt that HIV was the cause of AIDS, that guy would be famous. Now, there's 100,000 guys out there who had the opportunity. Just 10 years has passed. We've been waiting for this star postdoctoral fella to distinguish himself forever and get a lifelong grant from Tony Fauci, but he hasn't shown up. No one has bothered to write a definitive review. Any journal would take it. That right there proves that HIV does not cause AIDS. Just because Bob Gallo gets up, takes his sunglasses off and says, gentlemen, you discovered the cause of AIDS. That's all we have. New York Times article, CDC report, that's all we have.
Because of the different criteria that apply in different countries, you can be considered, you can test HIV positive in one country and be given an AIDS diagnosis as a result of that, whereas in another country you won't test HIV positive and you won't be given an AIDS diagnosis.
It's ludicrous that you can be positive in one country and not positive in another. Theoretically, I could be diagnosed with AIDS in the United States, but if I take 3 steps to my right, I wouldn't be diagnosed with AIDS, or I would lose my AIDS diagnosis when I crossed the border.
In 1992, I was encouraged by a doctor to take what's called an HIV test as a matter of social responsibility, and I was shocked and devastated and horrified when the results came back positive. It was one of those moments that everyone fears their whole life. A week later, I take the same test to an AIDS specialist. He looks and says, "This isn't a positive test. I don't know what this test means."
Since a false positive looks like a true positive, how can you ever distinguish whether it's truly a positive or a negative?
Well, that's a great question. It's going to be very hard to determine a false positive.
So I take the test again, and this time my results come back marked from the lab indeterminate. I'm faced with the decision, do I want to wait 6 weeks to test again or do it right away? I opted for right away. My results that time come back positive. Took it again, came back negative. I took it again, positive.
If we were talking about reality, the reality is that AIDS is over.
Somebody decided in the early 80s that there's this infection called HIV. And upon deciding that, I don't think it was debated enough.
In 1980, if you test positive, you are considered confirmed infected with HIV. But at the bottom of the page, in fine print, it states a person should have additional testing.
It does not allow you to tell a single person on this planet that they are HIV positive. And it's a scandal that this test continues to be used.
So again, I'm asking, where's the test? Where's the test that can confirm a diagnosis of HIV infection? And I can't find one.
I have the package. Do the answers to these questions help aid in the diagnosis?
Of course they did.
Really?
They do.
Now, if I tell you that the test you took was lousy and didn't mean a thing, does that make any difference for everybody to hear?
It'd make a difference for me.
Yeah, I know.
How can we say that HIV is the cause of AIDS when we don't know, based on current tests, whether or not anybody diagnosed positive actually has HIV?
In April of 2008, Congress approved a $50 billion expenditure for AIDS treatment and prevention.
The vast majority of the world's population is not at any measurable risk of HIV infection.
No measurable risk. Growing up in the age of AIDS, I was taught there were 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and contracting HIV from unprotected sex.
If you don't use a condom, there's a lot of chances that you can actually get the killer disease that is AIDS.
I did a study of the heterosexual transmission of HIV in California, and we recruited individuals who were infected with HIV. Then we recruited their sexual partners, and we looked at whether transmission, in fact, had occurred.
Padian runs a study. It's a 10-year study with the world's most virulent, terrifying sexually I mean, this thing jumps, off of penises into vaginas miles away. How many of them do you think, after 10 years, with the world's most terrifying, virulent, sexually transmitted disease, came up positive? Nobody. Nobody. Nobody who was negative came up positive.
The National Institutes of Health and even the media, especially in this country. I charge the media with part of the responsibility, and a very significant one, in a current Holocaust that can end up being worse than the one that occurred during World War II. When it was first announced that Dr. Robert Gallo had found the virus that probably caused AIDS, and that announcement was made with Margaret Heckler in 1984 to the press and to the media without one single scientific document appearing in any journal in the United States. And as we know now, without any proof whatsoever that the virus caused any disease. The media picked up on it for the sake of a story. And soon the virus that probably caused AIDS was now the virus that caused AIDS. It was proven in the press and nowhere else. Now it's interesting, a lot of questions are asked of me whenever I appear before the cameras and do what some people have called a stunt, to sell books. I'm from the planet Earth. I honestly believe that these individuals are from the planet Uranus. How anyone could suggest that I would stick myself with a virus that is supposedly deadly for the purpose of selling a book, that's complete insanity. And I will put the lie to the individuals of the NIH, particularly Gallo and Fauci and Hazeltine and Essex and the rest of these scoundrels of the worst order. Criminals guilty of genocide, without a doubt. I invite them to take me to court. I wish Burroughs Wellcome would take me to court because they have been putting out a killer drug knowingly. Because in a court of law, I would have the opportunity to provide the absolute proof and evidence, as I have in my book, Deadly Deception. Now, I'm not alone in what I'm doing here today. How does the press escape such obvious truths? Why would the finest virologist in the world, the most noted virologist, member of our National Academy of Sciences, Peter Duesberg, why would he put his entire career on the line? What did he have to gain? He's already lost his laboratory and his funding. They can't take away his professorship because he's tenured. Why would a Charles A. Thomas, professor emeritus of Harvard, say the same thing? Why would Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize in virology last year, why would he stick his neck out? What did he have to gain? These are the questions reporters should be asking. And in order to sell a book, I would inoculate myself with a virus that supposedly is deadly. Ever think that maybe we all know something that you just don't get? That if you take the virus out of the equation, you have a perfectly understandable disease with a perfectly understandable answer. And I might remind you, in case you are not aware of it, and if you haven't read my book, that we have known what causes acquired immune deficiency diseases for at least 70 years. It's in the medical textbooks. It's there for you to read. Number one cause on the face of this earth is malnutrition and starvation. That's African. Look to the headlines of the October 3rd issue of the London Times, Sunday Times last year. And the inside headlines that screamed across 2 pages, the plague that never was. Speak to Philip and Evelyn Kreinen, who head Partage with an organization of 250 people, their own hospital, their own doctors, their own laboratories, who have lived in the heart of the epidemic, supposedly, or the supposed epidemic, for 5 years. There is no epidemic. It doesn't exist. They are there. They're not some character who goes through from the World Health Organization and says, oh, I've seen the people dying. Of course you have. We all saw them on television in Somalia. What do you think you were looking at? That was AIDS, due to starvation, due to malnutrition. It's no big secret what's causing AIDS. We've known it for 70 years. Number 2 is drugs. And don't just think of street drugs, because the number 1 cause of AIDS today is actually 2 medical drugs. AZT, a drug that was discovered in the 60s as a chemotherapeutic drug for cancer and was shelved because it was too toxic to treat cancer. A drug worse than cancer is being used to treat people who are immunosuppressed. Now let's go back to the other causes of AIDS. So it's not only street drugs but medical drugs, but now 3 is radiation. What do they worry about at Chernobyl and Nagasaki and Hiroshima? But number 4 is chemotherapy. Number 4. The number 4 cause of death of acquired immune deficiency diseases. Chemotherapy. And the most toxic chemotherapeutic drug of all times, AZT, is what they're now using to treat AIDS. And the Concord study, completed last year. Now, can you imagine saying to the world, where was the press? Where are you people? Here they're giving a drug that costs thousands of dollars a year, and it doesn't do any good? That's if you want to believe that. But did anybody here bother to look at the insert, the paper that comes with the drug? It's a DNA terminator. It means it is a terminator, just like the movie. It terminates life. You terminate DNA, you terminate life. And they talk about side effects in the insert. When are you going to learn there is no such thing as a side effect in medicine? It's an unwanted direct effect. And you know what one of the unwanted direct effects of AZT is? Lymphoma, cancer, one of the diseases of AIDS, as they call it. Oh, another so-called side effect, which is really an unwanted direct effect, pancytopenia. You need a definition? Pancytopenia. Pan, all, cyto, cells, penia, loss of all your cells. That's AIDS. That is the definition of AIDS. So AZT, by definition, by their own drug insert, causes AIDS, and nobody survives AZT. That will eventually lead to your death. And they've cut the dosage way down because it was killing them too fast. It's like giving somebody a large dose of strychnine and they die within 5 minutes. And so the next person, you give them a few drops of it and they last 4 or 5 days, and you say, strychnine's a wonderful drug. This person lasts 5 times longer. This is the kind of thing that they present to the world. Now, I have offered for over a year now, and I continue to offer it, $100,000 to anyone who'll give me one scientific document that proves that HIV causes any serious disease. It doesn't. It is a scandal and a scam beyond belief. The virologists who are responsible for this, what do they have to gain? Now, I don't know what Duesberg had to gain, or Charles A. Thomas, or Kary Mullis. He already got his Nobel Prize. Why does he come out and say it? And he's the one that found the test, the PCR reaction. And he said that there is no body of evidence that supports that the virus causes any disease whatsoever. But what about the individuals who have perpetrated this lie? They are all multi-millionaires. What do we have to say about the National Institutes of Health when a private laboratory, independent laboratory, found AZT to be 1,000 times more toxic than the laboratory of the NIH? We can understand a 5% error in a laboratory, even a 10% error. But a 10,000% error? Or 100,000% error? That's fraud. And as I understand it, the word has gone out, and there's even documents and letters to prove it, that the CDC, the same organization that let blacks go untreated with syphilis, well documented, just to see what would happen with the disease. This same organization who had to admit that they can't give in on the AIDS thing now because nobody would ever be able to trust the government. I think the last election tells us what the people think about government. But science is acting no differently than politicians do. And now we have disease by politics. Isn't it strange that the same day or the day after Robert Gallo filed for a test for HIV after it was announced? This sounds like premeditation. You mean he just happened to have this test available? And so
you mentioned in one of your last talks that petroleum wasn't what we thought it was, that it wasn't a fossil fuel, that it didn't come from fossil animal.
Yeah.
Is it just a mineral? Is it a mineral like any other mineral? Is that how it? What would you say? How did it? What's the origin of?
You see,
petroleum?
when they first found petroleum, because they were beginning to make motors and needed on axles or wheels on railroad trains and all that sort of thing. And remember, trains started in the beginning of the 19th century. Then oil went from just a lubricant to a fuel, and it made it valuable. And Rockefeller happened to be the smartest man in the business at the time, but he made most of his money, or much of it, off the transport of the petroleum as well as selling it. But one thing they realized was, because oil is putting a price on oil is like putting a price on a pail of water. You know, no initial cost. It's in the ground, and in those days they were, some of it, almost what you'd call surface mining the oil. They didn't go down deep. So in order to get the price up, they hit on the idea that they would have to make it appear to be scarce. That after we take the next few barrels out, we're probably going to have to close this well. You know, that kind of thing. Well, a very fortuitous event. In 1892, there was a convention in Geneva of scientists to determine what organic substances are. Well, the definition of organic is a substance with hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. And so it's usually a living substance, a tree. You analyze a dead tree, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, and grass, and so on, living things. Animals, we are hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. So at this Geneva Convention, Rockefeller took advantage of sending some scientists over who said, oil, petroleum, is hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Therefore, it must be derived from the spoiling, the rotting of formerly living matter. And playing the game properly, when this scientific convention was over, they defined oil as the residue from formerly living matter. Well, that makes it a fossil fuel. I don't know why they decided to use the word fossil, but it says formerly living matter is fossil. Well, of course, today, and another thing we should know is that there has never been a fossil, a real fossil, found below 16,000 feet. And you can't argue at 16,000 there's a level line, because someplace the ground sinks and so on. But 16 is what the scientists say, 16,000. We mine oil, or we drill for oil, at 30,000, 33,000, 28,000 every day of the week. So right there we rule it out that it isn't fossil fuel. It's called fossil fuel for the minds of the public to feel that it is an asset that is running out, being depleted. We talk about depletion allowance, which is a lot of, you know, and actually, if you know the world's oil supply, you know that it is not going to run out for an awfully long time. It is the second most prevalent liquid on Earth. And we haven't begun to... Well, with all that background, you see, the people in charge of the petroleum business, for perfectly reasonable business things, like any other man in the business, wants to keep his price as high as he can get away with. And the way to do is just say, well, there's no more. The last barrel is going to cost $1,000, and then it's all done. And they preach that stuff. What bothers me is that in geology books, it's in there. The geologists say it's a fossil fuel. Somehow they've been bought. I mean, I went to a 4-year federal staff energy seminar run by the government of the United States during the so-called energy crisis. I was the participant that represented the railroad industry. The airline industry was there. Every AA, administrative assistant of senators and congressmen, was there. The CIA was there, the Defense Department was there, the State Department was there. Sometimes sitting right in front of me in the row would be Henry Kissinger with his friend, the head of Department of Defense. That's too bad, I can't put the names with them. But anyway, people like that, top men in the government, sitting there listening to the Federal Staff Energy Seminar. Well, what this was doing is for 4 years, they were teaching a propaganda line to the leading people in this country, and therefore to the leading people in the world, when you include the Schlesingers, Kissinger and Schlesinger, among others. And the object of it was, as Kissinger used in his own terms when it was time for him to speak, to create a world price for oil. In other words, not 30 cents a gallon here and 90 cents a gallon there, but let's get a world price. That's their goal, and they're trying to do that for wheat and everything else. We don't realize what the controls are, whether it's oil or some of these other things. Almost everything today is being categorized at the highest price they can possibly make it go. And so calling petroleum a fossil fuel is the basis for this system with respect to petroleum. And I don't know if the name Arthur Kantrowitz rings any bell. Arthur Kantrowitz is the head of the Kantrowitz Labs set up by the AFCO company near Boston, scientific laboratories. And a great man in the scientific world. And Kantrowitz and I were sitting at a table at this seminar once, and the table happened to be all young college grad, PhD geologists. And so just to get a conversation started, I turned to Kantrowitz and I said, Arthur, what do you think about this foolishness of these speakers talking about fossil fuel? And it was kind of put up. He started laughing. He said, you know, that gets me. He says, I don't have a geology degree, but he had 1,000 other degrees. And he said, I don't understand. He said, you'd think that these heads, these other fellows at the table, we did it on purpose, start listening, you know. And he asked, he said, are you gentlemen? He says, you're here at the meeting. Are you gentlemen by any chance geologists? And one fellow, yes, I am. And the other, yeah. He said, well, why don't you tell me? He said, why is oil? You know, and he went on like that. We brought the house down because nobody could argue with Kantrowitz. He like Einstein. People aren't going to. And he told him right there. He said, just drop it. But it's in all the books and in all the papers. But it started from that strange meeting in 1892, a scientific convention. I have a big, thick scientific encyclopedia put out by the D. Van Oesteren Company that's about 15 years old now, but it has the whole story of the conference. It doesn't have the Rockefeller part, but it has the whole story of how they straightened out organic chemicals and how it was all figured, and they've got petroleum right in there.
Amazing. Amazing. So
these aren't accidental things, you see. There's a dollar sign behind almost everything.
You create the world of the dream. We bring the subject into that dream, and they fill it with their subconscious.
How could I ever acquire enough detail to make them think that it's reality?
Well, dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange. Let me ask you a question. You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of what's going on.
I guess, yeah.
So how did we end up here?
Well, we just came from the,
Think about it, Ariadne. How did you get here? Where are you right now?
You were dreaming?
You're actually in the middle of the workshop right now, sleeping. This is your first lesson in training.
you.